Hi, this is Zach with Worn & Wound. Today I'll be taking a look at the Khaki Pilot Pioneer Automatic Chronograph. This is a watch that we first saw at Baselworld 2013 and it only just recently became available to the public. It's a really cool watch that Hamilton brought out that is based on a 1970s Royal Air Force issued military chronograph, which was actually made by several companies, Hamilton being one of them. And what this shares with that watch is a very similar case design, which is notable because of its asymmetrical design, as well as general dial design and chronograph function. This new watch, though, is powered by an automatic chronograph caliber called the H31 and features sapphire crystal and various other interesting details that make it a more modern and stylized version of that classic watch. And it comes in two colors, this silver dial version, which is quite interesting, and a black dial version with white accents, which looks a little bit more like the original version. The watch has a starting price of $1,845, and that's for the leather or NATO strap, or $1,895 for a bracelet option. So let's take a closer look now. The case of the Pilot Pioneer is, perhaps the most standout feature of the watch in that it has this very interesting asymmetrical design. This is closely taken from the original 70s Royal Air Force watches, and what they did was essentially bow out one side of the watch to add protection for both the pushers and the crown. And in doing so, they created kind of a very elegant solution to, crown guards that kept the kind of classic lines of a pilot watch, as well as didn't create any kind of more snaggable or kind of pointy areas that sometimes crown guards can do. And it's just a very cool design that definitely gives this watch a unique character. So the watch measures, according to Hamilton, at 41 millimeters in diameter, though I'd say it's actually more 43 because of the way that this watch is shaped. It really wears more like the diameters from one side to the edge of this crown guard here. Then it's 47 millimeters lug to lug and 16 millimeters tall, and that includes the domed sapphire crystal. And has a 22 millimeter lug width here. So it's actually very kind of stout, chunky watch. The lug-to-lug width is fairly small compared to the diameter only being 4 millimeters longer, so it definitely has a kind of wide and stout quality to it. The overall design, though, very elegant, very simple. You have these kind of classic sweeping lug shapes, fairly thick bezel here. Looking at it from the side, has a fairly tall bezel as well as case back, and then a fairly elegantly shaped central chassis here. Looking at the right side now, you have two chrono pushers as you'd expect, and the crown. The crown is really low and wide, measuring 7.5 millimeters in diameter, about 3.5 millimeters tall. What I really like about this is, given this little divot here in the kind of crown guard elongated side here, you can still very easily wind the watch manually, which is, I'm sure, what it was like on the original Valjoux 7733 military issued ones from the 70s. So I'm really glad that they kept that function, even though it is an automatic chronograph. Flipping the watch over now, you can take a look at the case back. Both models feature display case backs, which show off the caliber H31 movement, which has some interesting things going on, which we'll talk about later. And then some basic details about the watch, and it's held in place by 5 screws. One other interesting detail here is that on the other side of the case, there's this small kind of sunken pusher, which is used for changing the date on the watch. That is the quick set date function. It's not in the crown, it's right there, which is a bit different, but definitely kind of interesting. The finishing on the case is a bit strange and interesting too. So they have two different styles here. The mixed finished case, which has a vertical brushing on the central chassis and a polished bezel here, as well as a matte crown, really does a good job of kind of showing off the geometry of the case. I think it has really nice kind of sharp lines all around. It's very interesting. I actually quite like what they did with that. The other version, and this is actually only available on the NATO, is just entirely matte blasted, giving it a much more kind of military feel to it. In the kind of military watches, you have matte blasting for stopping reflection, as well as actually preventing kind of more corrosion. So this is a little bit more authentic, but at the same time, I think it kind of perhaps takes away a little bit from the overall geometry of the case. Either way, I think it actually looks very cool as a watch. But given the price, actually $1,845, I do like to have a little bit more kind of fancy finishing going on, as it just speaks to the higher price and the craftsmanship and everything else that goes into the watch. the dial of the Hamilton Pilot Pioneer stays very true to the original design, though has a handful of differences at the same time that I think in the end kind of speak to a more stylized, perhaps dressed up dial that the newer watch has, rather than a more kind of severe and perhaps purely functional military style. So the primary index here consists of numerals going around, except for 3 and 9, which have been taken away to have more space for the subdials. Larger 12 and 6, and then around it you have several types of hash marks going on. You have these larger dark hash marks with small lumed dots, which kind of speak to the original tritium dots on the 70s model. And then between them you have lines for the individual minutes as well as 1/5 second to have something to look at for the chronograph seconds that is running there. And that 1/5 second line was actually not on the original. The watch is a bit larger than the original was, so I think in adding that space to the dial, they had a little bit more room to kind of need to eat up. So they did that with this added index, and I think it did a really good job. It also kind of just ends the watch nicely towards the case edge. I quite like the look of the large 12 and 6. It's kind of like a modern aviator style. It gives it kind of a nice vertical balance, while the subdials have a nice horizontal balance. And on this colorway, you have the contrasting cream lume, which makes the 12 and 6 really pop out. Looking at the subdials, you have a 30-minute chronograph register at 3 o'clock and active seconds at 9 o'clock. I really like how they kind of reflect each other. Rather than doing on the seconds here, rather than doing 60, 15, 30, which might have been more typical, they went 16, 20, 40, which reflects the 10, 20, 30. So there's really nice symmetry going on there. Both of the subdials have circular graining in them, as well as a reflective beveled edge, which adds a little bit of pop and a little bit of texture. I think, like I said, this watch is a little bit more dressed up than the military version, and that looks really, really nice. Now just take a quick look at the black version, which is perhaps a bit more austere and a bit more, authentic to the original design. It's really high contrast, a bit severe, but has the same general structures. Because it's white lume or white ink, you don't have the same kind of pop coming from the 12 and 6. But I think it's still very nice and very legible. Both feature Roman sword style hands with elongated tips rather than the kind of index shaped hands on the original. I think proportionally they work really nicely, and the kind of flare, once again adds a little bit more elegance to the overall design. One thing that must be pointed out, and it's a bit unfortunate, is the date window that's located between 4 and 5. This was also something that wasn't on the original watch, and I kind of wish they didn't add it here. I think it's really kind of messes with the symmetry of the dial that they've created, and the proportioning of it just really stands out. So the circle there is about the size of the numerals around it. The white subdial really contrasts with the black. It's just too much. I don't think it's really necessary to design. I understand for commercial viability, perhaps they needed to put it in there to make the watch more desirable, but I just don't think it was necessary, and it does kind of hurt the overall aesthetic. Both watches feature Superluminova lume. This one has white, so it glows green. It's a bit stronger than the cream color one, which always seems to be the case, that these kind of cream colored lumes don't glow quite as brightly, but in both cases the lume is fairly decent. The Hamilton Pilot Pioneer is powered by the caliber H31 automatic chronograph. This is based on the ETA 7753 chronograph, which is much more common. The H31 is a variation that only Hamilton has access to. As part of the Swatch group, the various Swatch brands all have kind of interesting movements. This is one of Hamilton's, and it's very similar to the 7753, but actually has a 60-hour power reserve, which is great. Definitely makes it much more functional, as well as, I believe, various improvements supposedly to the precision and whatnot, but they don't really talk about how exactly that happens. Otherwise, it has a very similar look to it. You have this big rotor here with the Hamilton logo on it. Behind it, if I move, you can see this winding plate has this interesting little H patterning going on, which just adds a little bit of decoration to it. Otherwise, it's a very, it's not decorated. There isn't Côte de Genève or blue screws or anything like that throughout. But being a chronograph, I personally find them always very entertaining and enjoyable to look at, regardless of finishing. That said, at $1,800, perhaps more finishing would have been, definitely would have been acceptable. I would have liked to have seen it. Flipping the watch over now, works like any other chronograph. You have start and stop on the top pusher, reset at the bottom pusher. You pull out the crown one stop to change the time, and then actually to change the date, you use this little poker thing here, which they give you. It's an H shape, obviously, and you put it in the little dimple on the side here, and you push it, and it just pushes the date forward. It's actually a really easy way to change the date, regardless of the fact that I wish the date wasn't there. On the wrist, the Pilot Pioneer wears pretty large. It is a fairly sizable and chunky watch. Like I said, it's really like a 43 millimeter watch, which is definitely sizable. But the lug-to-lug width is fairly short, so it actually fits quite nicely on a smaller wrist. I have a 7-inch wrist, and I don't think that this watch is too big at all. That said, definitely very bold, a lot of presence. But I feel like that really, speaks to the style of the watch. It's definitely rugged, sporty, military style. It's not a really fussy watch by any means, nor is it a dress watch, yet it has certain elegant elements to it that I think, make it a little bit more passable, let's say, in kind of, daily life in the office, for example. The look of it is just great. I think this is, for a watch that was originally designed in the 70s, really works very well. Doesn't feel too retro at all. I think it has really nice, bold, styling to it. The large 12 and the large 6. We were familiar with modern aviators, so that kind of stuff is very common. I really, just think it works very nicely. This colorway, the silver color, is very interesting. It's definitely fun and a bit playful, and definitely less austere than the black dial version. I think it's an interesting colorway that I think lightens the overall presence of the watch. So it goes really well with blue jeans, things like that. It's definitely a much more kind of casual design. As is the matte case. I feel like matte cases don't really, they're definitely a more casual look to them. So this version comes on a NATO. It also, you can get it with a steel bracelet, but actually this matte cased silver dial only comes with this olive green NATO strap here. And this is actually a very cool NATO by Hamilton. So it's a very, very nice pale olive khaki color. And it has some interesting details you don't typically see on a NATO. For example, it has this leather patch here for supporting the holes. It has a more standard buckle shape. And then on the opposite side, it actually has a metal tip, which is also signed Hamilton. It's definitely nice. I love that they went and they didn't just use your standard off-the-shelf NATO, which a lot of brands do. But they did make a customized piece, and it works very nicely with the watch. That said, it is a fairly short NATO. I mean, the fact that it comes almost to the end here on a 7-inch wrist means that for a larger wrist, it's not even going to get through that second hole. So that's a bit of an issue, but I do, think it's quite nice looking. Now we'll take a look at the leather strap with the black dial option. The black dial option is definitely more severe looking, but I think in being that way is also perhaps a bit more mature. And with the brushed and polished case, definitely just has a bit of more. Mature is honestly the best word I can really think of it. There's something just more severe, more legible. And while I think the silver one might be a little bit more fun at first as I've been wearing this, I think the black dial has actually really grown on me to be the option that I just see fitting in and being a little more versatile in your life. I really like the way the mixed polishing on the case looks on the wrist. You have a glint of light from the bezel, then you have kind of a diffuse light from the case itself, from the brushed case, plus just the sharper contours really kind of bring out the geometry, which is aggressive, a bit severe, and very, very masculine looking, which I quite like. I think it really works well with this watch. This one came on a 22 millimeter black leather strap here. It's an interesting strap. It's got these double rivet design, which I think is, you see from here and there on Pilot watches. I don't personally love rivets. I think they're a little bit kind of decorative, but they do speak to the style of the watch. It's a very nicely constructed leather. It's quite soft. It's very comfortable. It has this kind of interesting hole style here, so it's double punched holes. And then the buckle itself, which you can see if I take off quickly, has kind of a Hamilton H shape, so they work their branding into there. Overall, I think it's quite nice. One thing that's really kind of a little bit silly, though, I have to say, is this watch is $1,845, and to me, in that price range, a NATO strap should be complementary with your leather strap. We all know what NATOs cost, so these two watches either shouldn't be the same price, or they should have both come with leather and a NATO option. It's a personal opinion, but I do feel pretty strongly about that. To wrap up, the Hamilton Pilot Pioneer automatic chronographs are a really cool new offering from Hamilton. We really love to see them digging through their archives and finding these kind of cult classics to reimagine and revitalize for a new generation. Especially, in this case, the Royal Air Force version wasn't really a civilian model, so that makes it kind of all the more cool and fun to have now. I think it's very well executed all around. The cases are really beautiful. The two different finishes you can get, the matte with a NATO strap has a much more kind of rugged and military look, whereas the brushed and polished version on the leather and bracelet options is a little bit more elegant, a little bit more sophisticated perhaps, but either way you get this very cool watch. At $1,845, it certainly isn't inexpensive, but in the scheme of Swiss-made automatic chronographs, especially new ones, it's definitely moderately priced to even on the low end. So, if the watch really, really speaks to you, you're not really going to find another watch, a contemporary watch in this price range to beat it. That said, I do wish there were a couple of things that were a little bit different. I do wish that they all came with these cool Hamilton NATO straps. I really like that they made their own NATO, and I just really wish that the date wasn't there. It is a bit of a disruption to the dial, and it really makes me wonder if you're remaking a cult watch like this, that people are going to get kind of, collectors especially, are going to get really into the details of, why do something quite so disruptive. Just doesn't quite make sense to me, but for the general public, it probably doesn't even matter. So please read the full review on Worn and Wound. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr. Thank you.